Actually, everyone, did you know that the peaceful image of Switzerland we know today is a bit of a public mask? In reality, the true nature of medieval Switzerland was that of a warrior nation. To survive in the harsh lands of the Alps, people had to become tough. Back then, for Swiss youth, war was not a choice but a business for survival, and their skills were so overwhelming that the kings of Europe were busy trying to hire Swiss mercenaries, saying, "Please join our side." Specifically, in the 15th and 16th centuries, the Swiss infantry was undeniably the strongest of the era. France, the Holy Roman Empire, and even the Vatican lined up with bags of money. However, the problem was that as this war business thrived, Swiss internal politics became a mess, and innocent young men fell like autumn leaves on foreign soil. Eventually, the breaking point arrived. In September 1515, at a place called Marignano in Italy, the Swiss army had a head-on collision with France over the control of Milan. To be honest, the result was a devastating defeat. Nearly 10,000 young men were killed that day, and it is still recorded as the worst disaster in Swiss history. At that moment, the Swiss people truly realized something. They said, "It is time to stop selling our children's blood for other people's fights." The Battle of Marignano became the starting point of the famous Swiss Neutrality, the seed of a desperate declaration of survival that they would no longer sell their blood. After that day, Switzerland shifted its stance at an incredible speed. The year right after the defeat, they signed a peace treaty with France, and in 1521, they even created a law restricting the dispatch of mercenaries. The warrior of yesterday turned into the pacifist of today. But was this because of some noble spirit of peace? No. It was a strategy born from thorough, realistic calculations that this is our way to survive. Switzerland's unique geographical cheat code also played a part. As you know, Switzerland is a rugged mountain terrain with almost no flat land. This makes it an impregnable fortress when defending, but conversely, it is the worst condition for invading others because supply is difficult and progress is slow. In other words, the national strategy became solidified as, let's focus on defending our own backyard rather than going out to fight. However, no matter how much Switzerland shouted, "I am not fighting anymore," on its own, it only looked like a tasty mountain shield to the surrounding great powers. As soon as Napoleon's French army invaded in 1798, Switzerland collapsed helplessly. This incident left Switzerland with two painful lessons. First, it is useless to just keep talking about neutrality with your own mouth. Second, neutrality that is not recognized by the great powers is lighter than a sheet of paper. After Napoleon swept through, the inside of Switzerland was in total chaos. But they say crisis is an opportunity, right? When Napoleon lost the war and retreated, the power players of Europe gathered to hold something called the Congress of Vienna. Here, the 5 major powers of Europe reached a very interesting agreement. They said, "Hey, let's not touch Switzerland when we fight among ourselves. Let's establish it as a permanent neutral country and use it as a buffer zone." In this way, Switzerland was reborn not just as a self-declared neutral state, but as the safety valve of Europe agreed upon by the great powers. Ultimately, Switzerland used the giant natural wall of the Alps as collateral to sell the promise of not taking anyone's side, and in return, they bought international security guarantees. Isn't that a very clever business? Now, following that, we have the story of Switzerland's unexpected charm, the terrifying military system that is ready to blow up its own front door for the sake of peace. Everyone, if you think, "Oh, it must be a peaceful and quiet country," just because Switzerland is a neutral country that does not go to war, you are very mistaken. In fact, Switzerland is the most thoroughly armed country in the world specifically to avoid war. Their neutrality is not an unarmed pacifism coming from a kind heart. Its true nature is a very chilling armed neutrality that says, anyone who steps on our land should consider it their funeral day. In fact, Switzerland is one of the countries in Europe where citizens own the most firearms, and the entire national territory is designed like a giant fortress. Usually, neutral countries say, "We don't have weapons, so please don't hit us." But Switzerland is the opposite. To maintain the principle of, "We do not participate in any war, but anyone who crosses our line is an immediate enemy," they armed the entire population and remodeled the mountains into fortresses. Now, you might think, wait, I heard the Swiss army isn't that large. You are right. The standing regular army is small, with fewer than 10,000 people. But what is truly scary is the militia system hidden behind it. Usually, everyone goes to work and does their jobs, but if a war breaks out, a structure exists where an elite army of over 200,000 people is automatically generated in just a few days. There is even a unique culture where citizens who have finished their military service keep their own guns at home. The gun ownership rate per capita is among the highest in the world. Yet, surprisingly, the gun crime rate is among the lowest in the world. Why? Because these guns are not for shooting someone, but are a symbol of collective defense to protect the country. What is even more chilling is the Swiss territory itself. Since the 19th century, thousands of military facilities have been secretly hidden throughout the country. This is called the redo it strategy. What looks like an ordinary rural house is actually a fortress with hidden cannons, and entire mountains are carved like giant warships. Swiss people even say things like this without hesitation: "On the first day of war, we will destroy half of our country ourselves." What does this mean? It means that if an invading army comes in, they will blow up all the bridges, roads, and tunnels that the invaders could use with their own hands. Explosives are already installed at every strategic point, and hidden batteries in mountain passes are waiting for the invaders. In short, they have prepared a guerrilla hell where you can enter, but you cannot leave a single step comfortably. In fact, Hitler also thought quite a bit about invading Switzerland, but in the end, he gave up. Why? Because the armed neutrality of Switzerland was too fierce. He concluded, "Even if I capture that hedgehog in the mountains, I will only get pricked by thorns and have nothing much to gain." There was economic and financial value, but above all, the fact that the entire Swiss population was ready to become guerrillas was too terrifying. Ultimately, Switzerland loved peace, but they knew better than anyone that peace is not kept for free. The most certain way to prevent war is to make the opponent not even think about starting one. Thanks to this tough strategy, Switzerland was able to remain the only country that was never occupied among the great powers for 200 years. Now, let's change the mood a bit and look into the hottest yet coldest inner workings of Swiss neutrality. Now, as I mentioned before, Switzerland is armed like a hedgehog. But can peace be maintained only with guns and swords? Not at all. The truly scary thing was the First World War in 1914, when the whole of Europe jumped into the fire. At that time, Switzerland had to become the ultimate master of the waiting game. France on the left, Germany and Austria on the right. Switzerland placed its troops right on both borders and sent this message: "We are not on your side, and we are not on their side. So don't even think about stepping on our land." But the real crisis was internal. The German-speaking towns cheered for Germany, and the French-speaking towns took France's side, almost splitting the country apart. At this time, a famous quote appeared that united Switzerland: "Our enemy is not on the outside, but on the inside that divides us." With this one line, they silenced the internal voices and maintained their neutrality. However, the true hellish difficulty level arrived during the Second World War. When Hitler swallowed almost the entire continent of Europe, Switzerland became a lonely island completely surrounded by Nazi Germany on the map. In this desperate situation, Switzerland made choices that were so realistic they were sometimes chilling. A representative example was the gold trade with the Nazis. At the time, the Nazis wanted to monetize the gold looted from occupied territories, and Swiss banks accepted this, saying it was legal. They essentially became a money laundering channel for the Nazis. And from Switzerland's perspective, this was a kind of survival insurance premium to avoid invasion. This part remains a very painful moral stain on post-war Swiss history. Even more heartbreaking is the story of Jewish refugees. In the early stages of the war, they seemed to accept some refugees, but as the war dragged on, Switzerland increasingly bolted its doors. In 1938, they even went so far as to first request the German government to stamp a red J on Jewish passports. This was to easily filter out and turn back Jewish people at the border. You can probably guess what fate awaited those who had to turn back. Of course, after the war, Switzerland made official apologies and went through compensation procedures. However, this is also the reason why even today, there is constant criticism that Switzerland made moral compromises by joining hands with the Nazis for its neutrality. Nonetheless, Switzerland has something to say for itself. In a situation where the surroundings were all enemy states, they had no choice but to dip their feet in the mud to keep the name of neutrality and survive. Ultimately, Swiss neutrality was not a noble pacifism, but a very desperate survival strategy of choosing the lesser of two evils in the worst situations. In this way, Switzerland passed through the giant waves of the two world wars and completed its preparation to evolve into an icon of trust where the most money in the world gathers. Now, everyone, what did Switzerland do after surviving the battlefield? They began to turn the title of neutrality into a very expensive brand. In 1934, the famous Swiss Banking Act was born. The content is very simple yet powerful. Customer information will never be disclosed. Even if any government comes, we cannot show it. If leaked, go straight to jail. Actually, this law was originally made to prevent Nazi Germany from tracking Jewish assets. But when the war ended and the Cold War era arrived, wealthy people, corporations, and even governments and intelligence agencies from all over the world began to run to Switzerland with sparkling eyes. They thought, my money will be safe if I leave it there. Switzerland's message was clear. We do not take any side, but we protect everyone's money incredibly well. It is quite attractive, but also slightly annoying. The power of this neutrality brand does not end here. Since the Cold War era until now, why have so many international organizations nested in Switzerland? First of all, since they don't take anyone's side, even people who are fighting can at least have a conversation if they meet in Switzerland. On top of that, there is no political interference. Security is perfect, and infrastructure is excellent. In short, it has become the VIP lounge of global diplomacy. Ultimately, by maintaining neutrality over the last 200 years, Switzerland has succeeded in an incredible branding beyond just, we don't do war, that Switzerland is safe, and Switzerland is not swayed by anyone. What is the result? The GDP per capita is at the top of the world, and it has grown into one of the 3 major pillars of global finance. Furthermore, the Swiss franc is known as the safest asset in the world. It has perfectly evolved from a country that does not go to war to a country that the whole world trusts and relies on. The flourishing of high value-added industries such as watches, precision machinery, and pharmaceuticals was also possible because there was this soil of stable neutrality. However, they say, nothing lasts forever. Cracks are starting to slowly appear in Switzerland's seemingly perfect shield of neutrality. The giant wave of change, called the 21st century, has begun to hit Switzerland. Switzerland's neutrality, which was a windless zone for 200 years, is now on an unprecedented test. The Cold War ended, financial scandals broke out, and with pressure from the EU and NATO, signals are being sent from all sides saying, "You guys, stop it already." Especially the Russia-Ukraine war that broke out in 2022 has shaken the very roots of the permanent neutrality that Switzerland has maintained. To be honest, until the Cold War era, Switzerland was necessary. When the East and West blocs were fighting, someone had to deliver messages and hold the money in the middle. But when the Cold War ended, the world changed. The international community began to put pressure on them to live transparently. Eventually, even Swiss banks, which lived off secrecy, could not withstand the pressure from the US and the EU. And after 2010, they raised the white flag, saying, "Okay, we will show you some information." But the real major event happened in 2022. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Switzerland made a very unusual decision in its history. They joined the financial sanctions against Russia. This is a truly huge event in the history of neutral countries. A country that used to say, "We don't take anyone's side," openly closed one side's wallet. Naturally, there was an uproar inside Switzerland. One side said, "What kind of neutrality is this? The principle has collapsed." And the other side said, "Does it make sense to neglect an invader in this day and age?" The hottest potato in Switzerland right now is the question of how far they should maintain this neutrality. Think about it. We are not in an era where people only swing swords and guns anymore. A single cyber attack can paralyze a national network, and a single financial sanction can make an economy stagger. Energy, food, and industrial networks are intertwined like a spiderweb, so it has become virtually impossible for Switzerland alone to shout, "Only I am neutral." The UN or WHO headquarters are in Switzerland, but they say nothing politically. This has also become a situation that doesn't quite add up. So, these days, Switzerland is very cleverly rewriting the definition of neutrality. Militarily, they still do not join any alliance and maintain their armament, but they selectively participate in political or economic sanctions. They have decided to join hands more actively with the international community on issues like cyber warfare or terrorism. Ultimately, Switzerland is not throwing away its 200-year-old shield, but remodeling it to fit the 21st century. They have started a very complex tightrope walk, choosing not to go to war and not to take anyone's orders, while simultaneously taking responsibility as a member of the international community. Neutrality was the shield that protected Switzerland, the brand that made it rich, and the cheat code that made it the center of world diplomacy. Although the method may be different from the 19th century, Switzerland will continue to carve out its own path with this new shield. Where would that tough survival instinct that endured for 200 years go?